Good afternoon. We're going to get started soon. Just wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping. So there is food over there. This is a lunch and learn. So secondly, we are recording this. It is not being streamed. It's just being recorded. So if you need to, I know there are some people who couldn't be here today. So wanted to put that out on the recording. We will get that out and we'll send a link out to everybody who is registered of where that is. I don't know where that's going to be placed now. And the third thing I wanted to just housekeeping type of thing is we, so myself, Judy Johnson and Brooke Manda with the North Carolina Wildlife Preservation are doing this presentation, and we want it to actually be more of a conversation as we're working through it. We have, if you look at the agenda, allowed plenty of time for questions and answers, discussion, and that's where we think the most rich part of this conversation will occur. So, but if you say something and you need some clarification, please don't feel bad about, interrupting and say, what did you mean about that, or whatever that type of thing is. But if it's a discussion type item, let's hold those to the end and we can have that richer conversation. So first thing on here is to welcome you, which I welcome you all to attend being here, and then want to just talk through some introductions. And this is our Chapel Hill team, which is a very diverse group of folks. So, and I haven't seen Dave Allman here yet, but he is our stellar star player at making things dance on a computer. I mean, well beyond my skills of even imagining this. But he is with our GIS and Analytics department. We have our Office of Sustainability, which is John and Brennan. And then planning is myself, Pat, and Catherine, who is another member of our planning team. And then our stormwater management is Allison Leakley. She is unable to be here today. She has had a pre-planned vacation and we couldn't convince her to be here. She is really the knowledge base of our environmental aspect of this green infrastructure map that we're trying to put together. And then our other partner in this is Brooke Manda, which I alluded to earlier. And I'm going to do a fairly brief presentation and then turn it over to Brooke, which will go through the Green Growth Toolbox. So we wanted to kind of start this off with you about, and just kind of throw it out there. What does green growth mean to you? What do you think this is? So interested in thoughts from you all of what you think green growth is. And anybody, just yell it out, not.
Population expansion with sensitivity to and awareness of requirements for ecological environmental.
Very good. Others? Yes.
Nature and cities.
Perfect. I mean, we're trying to understand green growth means a lot of different things. Everybody has their own opinion on what green growth is, and I think it's a really, important to understand what green growth is and what we're trying to talk about. So, any other thoughts of what green growth is? What do you think we're going to talk about today? Go ahead, you had your hand up.
Promoting the utilization of one's property in a way that the overall environment. Lesson we learned. By turning laws into something else that is correct.
And that's a very valid, the point there you made that the green growth, all of the environmental things, we have large scale policies that, the United States or the world, all of those things, but we also have our, influence and impacts. Thinking about it's everything along that scale. So what we're thinking about these are some of the concepts that we're thinking about what green growth means in Chapel Hill from a policy and that sort of perspective. It's what are we thinking about? So a lot of the things that you see on here are plans that the town has adopted over the last 5, 10, 15 years and trying to make that focus on green growth. So we have one of the guides that we've been using is the first one on there, the future land use map, affectionately called the PLUME. And this is a map where we are looking at things like the 2050. So, 20, at this point it's 25 plus years in the future. What is our land use going to look like? The primary focus of that map is looking at redevelopment. And we have, I think there's 6 focus areas, and we're seeing that redevelopment occurring in the Florida and Bluefield district. That's where that map is telling us to direct that new growth, the redevelopment. So focusing in, we have the established infrastructure, the roads, all of that stuff is there, and we've already had impervious surfaces and buildings there. The Wegmans is a good example of redevelopment. That was a car dealer, and it's a new development. So it actually had less impervious surface on that property. And so that's where a good way to focus new growth. We want to continue to grow, but can we redevelop what we have? Other things on here are, we have our climate action plan, which is a big part of this. We have our mobility plan, which is another thing that we're building the connections between different areas. These are all important aspects of what green growth is in Chapel Hill. So when we start thinking about green growth in Chapel Hill, there's 3 aspects that we are looking at or thinking as prominent things. And looking at development it's a very complex conversation. It's not just a complicated, it's complex. There is no right answer on development. And we all have different ideas of what is, it's all the shades of gray. And looking at that, so 3 main components to that are looking at our water resources, our land uses, and our wildlife habitats. So those are the 3 bases of where we're looking and focusing our policy and process discussion about green growth. Water, we do already, these are things that we do today. Things on the books today, ordinance related, we have resource conservation district regulations. These are the areas adjacent to streams. So we have very restrictive what can occur in that first 50, 100, 150 feet from a stream bank. Those are in our ordinance today. You are very limited to types of uses, impervious surfaces, floor area, and those sorts of things. We have stormwater regulations. We just adopted a new regulation making it addressing, the new development has to address the 100-year storm. So these are regulations that are on our books today. And certainly the floodplain, and Ernest with our stormwater is the expert on floodplain, so I'm not going to say more than that, but we have, I mean, these are town regulations, they're state and federal regulations, and then the supply regulations. Basically, if you look at Franklin Street, heading out, everything on the south side of Franklin Street is in the Jordan Lake Water Supply watershed and has restrictions for impervious. And then our climate action plan, which adds another level of, and climate action plan at this point is a comprehensive plan. And we're looking at holding portions of that in becoming components of our ordinance where we would be regulating those sorts of things. Land use, I talked about the Bloom. We have a joint planning agreement. This is, and I want to take just a second to talk about the joint planning agreement. This is a large policy agreement that was done in the 80s in Orange County. It's a three-party agreement with Chapel Hill County. And you probably have heard, if you're involved in land uses at all, planning in this area, about the rural buffer. This joint planning agreement established that rural buffer. It's roughly 33,000 acres of land that surrounds Chapel Hill and Carver. And the intent of that is that it's a line that Chapel Hill and Carver are not going to cross. Our development occurs within that, so we're not going to creep outwards. I mean, if you look at some of our neighbors to the south or to the east, they don't have those bounds and can continue to grow and sprawl outward. We have an agreed upon buffer, agreed upon limit. And so that is forcing or has created a lot of our land use policies that are in effect in Chapel Hill and Carver and Orange County. We have recently, a year plus ago, we adopted the complete community framework. And it's building a complete community, not just not on every single lot. I mean, we're not going to fit everything on a lot, but within an area, I mean, that everywhere greenways, being able to get to places where you don't always have to get into a car, that you could ride a bike, ride an e-bike, or walk to services that you might need. And Taz is our expert working on the rewriting our rules. This is our LUMO update. We hope to have a new draft or a draft of our new LUMO come later this year. And as part of that, we would be looking at, that's where we're bringing in some of the sustainability changes, the climate action, and all of these things are trying to feed into that ordinance that we would be before our council for adoption, and this would set the stage for new development. Wanted to just take a minute on the wildlife. So this is another important component of our green growth strategy. So we talked about resource conservation districts, parks and open space. These are all important components for wildlife habitat. We have been in partnership. We have members of our staff work with the New Hope, the Triangle Connective Collaborative and the Natural Heritage Program. And we have, today, the last bullet is why we wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about, you can see it says beta there in capital, because we still aren't beta, but wanted to share with you what we are working. So if you notice as I went through these last couple of slides, some of these are the hydrology. There are ordinance outputs from that. Some of the things that we don't necessarily have ordinance related requirements are like wildlife habitat. We are thinking about habitat, but we don't have the ordinance that says like stream buffers is the 50, 100, or 150 foot stream buffer that we require preservation of. We don't have that comparable for habitat, and we understand habitat is a critical part of our world. We also have, and that's why I say this is complex, because we have this rural buffer, which is on a larger scale helping to look at that corridor. But we do have habitat corridors that go through Chapel that we need to be sensitive to and be thoughtful. This is a look at our assessment tool, and want to be very, we are still struggling with a name for this. We have come up with many names, and none of them are actually the name that we have settled on. We started out of our complete community framework, wanted to have the adopted component of our conference was a natural areas map. This is our natural areas map, but we're not happy with that name because a map implies static, it's a map, whereas this is a dynamic map that's built off of 10, 15 different layers of information, which, you know, the environment is always changing, so those are growing and moving and shifting. So we're working through that. And we are trying also to understand and work through this, and that's why we're sharing this with you as a beta, that we are trying to figure out how to use this. You can see on this map, I'm going to second to walk you through there, there's ranges from green to red. Green is the most preferred to be preserved, red being the areas most likely or most least sensitive to development. And using those, need to be careful about how we use those words because you can see the red areas there are areas that we know development has occurred. And then if you, I should probably warn you to the map because I look at this map all day. This is 15501 running through there. Here's downtown. We're located right around in here. It's not shown. So here's downtown. I'm sorry, I can't not call up, but 15501 going up. Thank you, Brendan. 15501 going. I don't know where that's coming from, but I appreciate it. So, so you can see that, I mean, and there's 54 heading to the east. And then Martin Luther King heads up along the side. So that's the somewhat of the orientation of this map. A lot of the green areas that head through there are the streams. I mean, I don't know, Kevin, if you can pull out, you know, where the Bowling Creek runs through there. I mean, the greenway that runs through town, you can, the parks show up on there as green, that sort of thing. So we're looking at this. This is it's a weighted heavy, and I know Brooke can help us understand if these are, if you have a very specific question about the layers, Brooke is our expert here today because Allison is missing. But looking at that, that's what we're getting out of this model. And I wanted to add one more slide. I wanted to kind of walk you through. This is a property up at 15501 and I-40, the UNC healthcare property. They put in medical office building 1, which is right at the corner of Easttown Drive and 15501. And about a year or so ago, we went through a conditional zoning. They got approved to build this large development. So here's the existing medical office building. They want to put in more. A whole bunch of medical office type buildings and all. And as we were working through this project, and this was quite a number of years of discussion, is that northern piece there, on this side of, this is where Easttown comes back into 15501. This northern property there, it's about 20 acres. And you can see on my excerpt on this side, this is from our map, that this portion of the property showed up as green, an area that we need to be thoughtful about development on that piece. That it is sensitive, and it does, and actually it does show up on, it is showing up on one of the heritage map, and I'm probably not using the right terms for that. And through the process of working with UNC Healthcare, they have agreed to preserve this as part of their development approval, agreed to preserve that northern 20 acres, 10 acres. And a portion of this property was approved to be developed, although it is the last piece that would be developed on this property. So It may not be the perfect, but that's, I say, this is always a complex discussion of development. You know, it's a balance and there's not a right or wrong answer. And so that was I think this kind of showed how we could have used this tool if we had the tool at the time. We did not have this when this was going through our town council a year plus ago. So,
Can you talk a little bit more about what makes that area sensitive and the other area not sensitive? Just so we have a sense of what the sensitive means.
yes,
So
and
not
I'm gonna
sure-
broke the house with that.
I'm not that familiar with the particular piece of, this project, but I know that, that northern corner that we're showing up as green is part of the natural area that is identified by biologists going out into the field and identifying that there are high quality natural communities
Mhm.
present, and I don't know the particulars, some sort of hardwood.
And there, the soils,
Beach victory, and there's tracks. Designated in that area there may have been some rare species that were present at the time of the survey that were documented there. I don't know the particulars of that.
it's also an arm, if you will, from the New Hope Creek, you know, the whole, and this is, unfortunately, when 40 was constructed, this kind of isolated this piece. It is somewhat isolated from connections to other areas. There's not a connection to the south. I mean, there is a culvert under 40 in that area, but this is kind of an out finger of the New Hope Creek.
So it's an island, which.
Yeah.
When you think about, you all think about interactions with other areas, and
Yeah,
so if there's development there, is that going to end up basically destroying the value of this?
right. Well, and actually one of the data layers we'll look at in a little bit is our connectivity data layer, and it will show that this is actually part of the network. So there's still some connections, even though this area has been like isolated, so.
Corridor, connect, corridor.
Yeah,
It's also hard.
but there were people who went out and did identify those features that were of value.
It could be. Excellent.
So that's an application of how we could have used this tool. We have this tool. We did, I mean, there was a lot of on the ground research on this property, particularly the healthcare property. And, this information, which is, I guess, is tested, this is part of our beta testing, that validates that work that was done. So not validate that work there validated the work that we were doing. So trying to make sure we have ground truth in our model. I mean, this is an example where that is shown. And that takes care of my presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Brooke, who's going to talk to us about the Green Growth Toolbox and how we're related.
Hey, Judy? Okay.
Yeah, so that is-
Yeah. Okay. All right, so welcome. Thank you for giving the opportunity to speak to you today about one of the programs I work with. Again, my name is Brooke Massa. I'm a conservation biologist with the Wildlife Research Commission. And for those of you who don't hunt and fish, you're probably not familiar with the Wildlife Research Commission, but we are a state agency that's charged with protecting wildlife habitat and wildlife in the state. And we also provide opportunities for wildlife-related recreation, wildlife viewing, hunting, fishing, etc. But one of the programs we have, it's a very small program in our agency, is called the Green Growth Toolbox, and I work on this as part of my job. Before getting into what the Green Growth Toolbox is, I want to just recognize that it was created in collaboration with many partners. I don't know what, it's like on automated board or something, but let's see if I can stop that. No, okay, I don't know. But we work with other state agencies like the program, Fish and Wildlife Service Federal Agency to create this program, and also nonprofit partners with the Nature Conservancy. But the most important partner that we work with in creating and implementing the Green Growth program is, of course, the communities that we work with. Local governments are ones They're really putting this work all around. So what is the Green Growth Toolbox? It's a non-regulatory technical assistance program to support communities in integrating conservation-based science and. Sorry, I didn't know it on some automatic. I feel like I should. Oh, it's because I probably attached to your presentation. Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. Sorry. But yours didn't seem like it was going to automatic. Yeah, so anyways, so I'll just keep talking. It's a, maybe I'll wait. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's get back into here. So, okay. So it's a non-regulatory technical assistance program that supports communities in integrating conservation science and conservation data into land use and transportation. So here's the big question that you all answered. What is green growth? From the Wildlife Resources Commission's perspective, green growth is about directing growth towards areas that are more appropriate for human development, and therefore directing it away from areas that are more environmentally sensitive. So it's not at all about trying to stop growth. Of course, that's an unrealistic expectation in North Carolina where we're growing so rapidly. More steering growth. And the reason why the Wildlife Resources Commission became so interested in land use planning was because through our strategic planning process, which we do every 10 years, we go through a process where we go through all the wildlife species known in North Carolina, and we kind of assess their status. And through that, we determine which ones are what we call greatest conservation need. And those are species that are federally or state listed as threatened or endangered. They're at-risk species, and they're also species where we know if we continue, like with the status quo actions, their populations are in decline. They may be declined to the point where they eventually would become listed as a threatened or endangered species and be at risk for extinction. So in North Carolina, we have over 450 wildlife species that are considered species of greatest conservation need. And as part of that assessment, we also look at the threat, of course, and time again, not for all the wildlife species, for vast majority of wildlife species in North Carolina, the pattern of development is the main driver of their population decline. And when I say pattern of development, I mean habitat loss and fragmentation and degradation due to development that occurs in like a sprawling manner. So this kind of diagram, I guess we call that, a schematic. This demonstrates what that could look like on the ground. So on the left, you have this forested area. And then as time goes by, you get little pockets of housing. And what happens is this housing, it's obviously habitat loss right there. Those white spots get taken out of the habitat. But there's also habitat degradation along these edges where the housing development, whether it be like a lawn, like you mentioned earlier, or an actual building, is going to degrade the habitat that is protected because there's these things called edge impacts. And when we think about edge impacts, we think about things like lighting impacts, invasive and exotic species being planted and spreading into natural areas, cats, another exotic species that spread into natural areas. And there's a lot of edge predators, not just cats, but other predators that like to roam the edges and that put more sensitive species at risk. And so you have these edge impacts showing up here, and the habitat is mostly connected. But of course, as you put more and more holes into that forest, the habitat becomes more and more disconnected, and that's habitat fragmentation. So those three things is driving a biodiversity decline in the state. And so we started this program, which is kind of like a conversation. Those of us who work in the natural community, we know about what's going on there, and we want to share that with those of you who work in human communities and have this exchange. And that's what the Green Growth Toolbox was developed to sort of support conversation between communities, different natural and human communities. Wildlife overpass as a bridge between the who work in these fields. And there are a lot of reasons why we think, well, a lot of reasons why science would suggest that communities consider protecting natural areas, not just for the benefit of wildlife habitats, but also for all sorts of other benefits that human communities gain when they do a good job at protecting their natural areas and their natural resources and their wildlife habitats. One, climate resilience. I know, like you mentioned, you know, Chapel Hill is going through a climate resiliency planning project, or you may or not, I don't know what the status is, but there's a big buzzword out there, nature-based solution. And the assumption is that nature is going to help us with making our communities more resilient. But the assumption is that nature is going to be there. And so we really need to protect nature in order for it to provide that service. You know, that is the place where we're going to sequester and store our carbon and our emissions, right? So we can work on the built environments and reduce those emissions, but if we're going to have emission source, we need a place to store it. And our forests, of course, are perfect carbon storage place, but also hazard mitigation associated with the more extreme climate weather events that we're experiencing due to climate change. You know, we don't protect it. If we protect nature, they can help mitigate some of those attacks. If we protect the floodplain, it will take the floodwaters, and if we protect our trees, it will reduce the heat effects of climate. Better health all around, public health. There's been plenty of public health research out there that demonstrates the benefits of natural areas on public health. In communities that have better access to natural areas have lower rates of obesity because people have an opportunity to go outdoors and recreate outdoors and move around a little bit more. But also mental health benefits. There's lots of research that demonstrates the benefits of being able to go out into nature, de-stress, you know, have that opportunity. In fact, I will say that we have a handbook. We haven't got to that part of our presentation yet, but we do have a handbook that anybody who's interested in learning more about all these co-benefits, I would direct you to that handbook on our website because we have a whole section devoted to like parsing out all scientific literature that demonstrates the benefits that communities gain when they protect their natural areas. Just one more thing I'll hit on this slide is economic returns. And I want to say that when communities spread, like, not like Chapel Hill, but like many communities in North Carolina, it comes at a greater cost to those communities because to spread those homes out means to spread out services that supply those groups. Sewer, water resources, road maintenance, road construction, all those costs are actually costs to the community. So if you can grow in a denser fashion in the way that Chapel Hill is trying to grow or is growing or has grown rather, it helps reduce the costs associated with that spread out development pattern. But there's another environmental cost that comes from not doing a great job of protecting your natural areas, which is of course water quality. So if you do a good job at protecting your natural areas, you'll do a better job at protecting your water resources so that when communities downstream pull water out of the stream to drink, it will be cheaper for them to clean it. And I think a great case study for that is New York City's water supply. They've done a great job of protecting the watershed in the Catskills of their water supply. And then as a result, they don't have to go through, they just have like a UV treatment system. They don't have to go through all the intense filtration that many other communities of their size have to go through to clean their water. And they put out an annual report every year to show all the billions of dollars their city saves by investing in land conservation in their watershed. So there's a lot of benefits. We're not going to go through that. It's a whole other presentation. But just to know that that exists and there's good reason to consider protecting natural areas in our communities. So what is in the Green Growth Toolbox? What are these resources that we provide to communities? One, again, we have that handbook that I just mentioned. It's available on our website. Our website is another resource. But the handbook is really tailored towards, well, we tailored it towards land use planners, but we hope that anybody can take it and find valuable information in it. But basically what we do is share and interpret conservation data for land use planning, and then interpret how it can be used in land use planning policy and ordinances and development review. And so it's a great resource for anybody who's interested in being involved in land use planning and wanting to understand how to make recommendations on how to protect resources in a developing landscape. We provide training workshops. So we actually have an upcoming training workshop. I think I left there's a flyer on the table. We do half day and full day training workshops. And the one that's coming up is a half day workshop in Pittsburgh, May 31st in the morning at the library there. There's a flyer on the table that if anybody's interested, you're all welcome to come. Then we'll basically go through data layers. We'll talk about case studies of conservation-based land use planning. And we'll do some hands-on exercises. We provide free technical assistance. I like to highlight that because it's kind of like the cream of the crop. If any community is undergoing a land use plan update or any type of planning update or an ordinance review like you all are right now with LUMO, we can provide free technical assistance, which is non-regulatory review of drafts. And basically we provide our 2 cents on how it might be improved for conservation outcomes. And then lastly, we have a small pot of funding called Partners for Green Growth, where we support communities that want to do conservation-based land use planning, but may not have capacity on staff to do that. So it's a small piece. It's a small pot of funding. So we have that. That's our toolbox. So I thought today we would just look at some of the conservation data that I know David here? Okay, David Allman, he's the GIS person in Chapel Hill, has worked really hard at creating that natural areas mapper that Judy demonstrated, and he's integrated a lot of the data layers we recommend be used in that natural areas mapper. So our data is not the Wildlife Resources Commission's data, just to share. It's data that comes from many resources where we've gone, or many sources, we've gone through all the data that's available, kind of handpicked the data that's most accurate and most relevant for land use planning, and made recommendations to land use planners on how best to incorporate that data into land use planning. Most of the data we suggest be used is accessible through the Natural Heritage Program Data Explorer. They are a major state agency that does data management for conservation. And so Wildlife Resources Commission's biologists go out on the ground, they give their data to the Natural Heritage Program, and they manage the data. And so we'll take a look at the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, which is, you can't see because that, oh, get rid of that. I guess under that turn the volume little thing is the
There's an X there. I don't know if you can.
can I get that? Can I do that? I don't.
The slide cursor.
Oh, okay, yes, it says. Oh. Oh, okay, thank you. So yeah, everybody take a look if you're interested in learning about data, the conservation data that's available for your community. ncnde.natureserve.org. It's a great resource. And what you'll see when you open it up is something that looks like this. Here's Chapel Hill. We'll zoom into this a little bit, but basically you're looking at a bunch of different layers, data layers that you can shut on and off, including managed areas, which are already protected lands, natural areas, which we mentioned earlier. Natural Heritage Program natural areas are areas that have been identified by biologists going out on the ground, having either multiple rare species that are occurring there, or they have high quality natural communities that are exceptional quality, so much that they deserve to become a natural heritage natural area. And the recommendation is that if you want to protect biodiversity in the state, you focus first on protecting your natural heritage natural areas, because you know there's really important things on those areas, in those areas. So this is what it's going to look like, and just to take a look at something, some of these data layers in a little bit more detail, just a couple. This is that natural heritage natural area data set. And again, here is Chapel Hill, a little bit bigger than Chapel Hill, but something you'll notice, let me creep out here, is that all around in the rural buffer is where you have these high quality natural areas. Within Chapel Hill, you don't have that many natural areas popping up. And that's great, because what you're doing by encouraging growth into Chapel Hill is that you're protecting all these areas in the county that are showing up as high quality natural areas. And so that rural buffer has been very effective at helping to maintain the integrity of the natural areas that occur all around Chapel Hill. Similarly, like I mentioned we had this analysis that Judy mentioned that the town of Chapel Hill collaborates with the Triangle Connectivity Collaborative. Triangle Connectivity Collaborative is a partnership of conservation organizations that work in the triangle. And they came around this interest in trying to understand where the highest priority wildlife habitat corridors are. So we did an analysis, it was led by Julie Tuttle, who's an ecologist, to identify the highest priority habitat blocks and corridors, and to create like a habitat network for the triangle area. And so what you see are these high priority, oops, I thought maybe I, so you can see Chapel Hill here, right? It's this white spot here in the middle. And you can see, again, all around Chapel Hill are these really important high priority wildlife habitat patches and corridors. But again, like Judy mentioned, we need to protect what remains in Chapel Hill. So we have connectivity, habitat connectivity through our developed areas is really essential. We don't have a lot of habitat left, but we can at least provide the corridors and the network so that wildlife and other elements of biodiversity, plants, can move through our landscape safely. And wildlife, of course, need to move through the landscape, not just for like migration, but also for just daily needs, right? So we do have habitat network incorporated in, we do have that available in, or present in Chapel Hill that needs to be protected. And David, his natural areas mapper, has incorporated this information into that as well. Another really cool tool that's available through the National Heritage Program is the species and community search. So if you're interested in learning about what species are known to occur in Chapel Hill, well, you can search by county, you can't go down to municipality. But in Orange County, there are known 199 unique species or natural communities that in Orange County. And I will say 199 records so there are many more records, but of unique species, types of species. But that's also including historical records. When you go through and just look at what's current. In Orange County, there's 213, or I'm sorry, 113 current records. So there are historical records that go back to the 1800s, where when Chapel Hill still had like Stockman sparrow. We don't have Stockman sparrow here anymore. Doing the sand hills and places like that, but not up here. So yeah.
I'm sorry, this is accessible through the same website.
Yeah, so great question. So there's a tab at that map. If you get to the mapping page, there will be a tab that says species and community search, and you can do that first. So let's talk about some of the things that do occur in Chapel Hill. Four-toed salamander is a state special concern species. So actually, the four-toed salamander population in North Carolina is one of the strongest populations that we know of. There's a lot of thriving populations within the headwater seeps and isolated wetlands of Chapel Hill. So isolated wetlands and headwater seeps are not normally protected habitat. Isolated wetlands are often too small to be protected under the former Clean Water Act rules, and now under the new Clean Water Act don't have protection. Very rarely will isolated wetlands get protected. And so species like four-toed salamander, spotted salamander, which many of you have probably seen, mole salamanders, which are much more rare, marble salamanders, and many frogs will rely on these isolated wetland habitats. And headwater streams where the four-toed salamander also lays its eggs. Another important habitat in Chapel Hill, of course, are our streams, and Chapel Hill has a great resource conservation district that sends a 150-foot buffer on streams, which is why there's still habitat connectivity really going through Chapel Hill. And it's why that some of these species that are listed up here, Carolina creek shell, chameleon lamp mussel, eastern creek shell, notched rainbow, those are mussel species that are state listed species. So they're still hanging on in and around Chapel Hill. And the reason why nobody probably cares too much about mussels, but they're actually the most endangered taxa group in North Carolina. So if you look at the federally listed Endangered Species Act, the types of species that come out most often are the freshwater. And they're not the most charismatic species, but they are really important. They play a really important role in water quality because they're filter feeders and they feed the dirt and pollutants out of the water quality, out of the water column. And so when we have clean water, they can thrive and they'll do the job of cleaning it even further, so it's even cleaner for our use. But when it becomes polluted to a certain degree, or has heavy sediment flows from runoff, from excess stormwater runoff from impervious surfaces, then these species don't live anymore in this aquatic system. Another species that occurs right around on the outside of Chapel Hill that I know is probably more in the rural buffer, but it could possibly occur in Chapel Hill if somebody were to take a look for it. There's not that many people looking for these things. But the Carolina ladle crayfish is another sensitive species that exists around here. Okay, and then of course upland mixed hardwood forests, like that natural area that was up near Easttown. It's an upland mixed hardwood forest. Fortunately, we don't have any mixed hardwood forest type. And this is where we like to go hiking and recreate outdoors. Beautiful habitat, right? We love being out in these areas. They're beautiful. Box turtles, right, use upland habitat forests. Box turtles, you see them out there, that's because you're out in an area that's suitable for them, that's large enough for them. There are not that many places like that. And in fact, they're one of our species of greatest conservation either, the box turtles. And the other one that uses these forests that is actually proposed endangered species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is tricolored bat. The tricolored bat is one of these species that's not impacted by development. It's a species that actually was very common not very long ago, but it has been impacted by a fungal disease, white nose syndrome, has seen dramatic population declines. And so the fact that we still have tricolored bat in this area is like we are a place where this bat can hang on and eventually, hopefully, repopulate the areas where they've seen 99% population declines, such as mountains. So another important habitat. So I'm going to go to mine here. Okay. So lastly, last habitat I want to talk to you about today is early successional habitat. And often people don't really see the value in early successional habitat. These are habitats that are growing after some major catastrophic type of event, like say a cedar cutting. They grow up in a diverse understory like herbs and bushes, and then eventually into primary successional trees, early successional tree species like sweet gums and things like that. But when it's in this like low early successional stage, it's really important habitat for our grassland bird species. And grassland birds are the most imperiled type of bird species in the country. So any species that relies on grassland habitat are actually at risk. That includes things like doggerfish, like really hard to find around here now, but also grasshoppers, arrow, eastern meadowlark. They will use these habitat types. Another way you get this habitat type on the ground is like fallow agricultural fields, early successional habitat. And then of course, there's all this interest in pollinator species. Well, this is the habitat for our native pollinator species. And so if we want to make sure we have these pollinator species, our native species in North Carolina into the future, we really need to focus also on protecting early successional habitat. And not just protecting it, but maintaining it, because it does take maintenance. It has to be burned or mowed or something over a course of time to keep it in this early successional stage. Okay, so we have recommendations from the Green Tool Block on how we think communities should use data like this, and habitats and that GIS data, that mapping data we looked at earlier. One is to integrate the data into the community's GIS system, which is what Chapel Hill has done, so great. And then bring that data into plans, like land use plans, transportation plans. Use data in the development of incentives and work the LUMO. And then lastly, use data in development review. So like the Easttown example Judy showed. Or the people who were involved in that had access to natural heritage data and they used it to make decisions on how to protect that area of the Easttown development so that it could stay as part of the natural heritage natural area and the Easttown development could then be built. Or it's still in process. Yeah. So we recommend data be used in this way. And we recommend when you have these habitats in your community, which all communities have many of these habitats, that you apply some principles from landscape ecology to protect them. And there are green growth guiding principles protecting those habitats, buffering them from incompatible land uses to reduce that edge impact that we talked about earlier, and then keeping them connected across the landscape. And it's really easy to understand that. And when we think about stream systems, we know that we want to protect clean water, we protect the stream, then we buffer it from incompatible land uses by adding a riparian buffer on the stream. And then you also try to keep it connected throughout the course of the stream, which is like removing dam removals, not building the dams, not culverting, rather bridging when you have to cross them with roads and things like that. So protect, connect, and buffer. Those are really important principles. And so just take a look at some of these concepts. This is not as applicable to Chapel Hill, but the larger habitat areas that you can protect, the better job you'll do at protecting natural resources and habitats for a wider diversity of species. But what I want to say is that, of course, when Chapel Hill is building inward and upwards, they're doing a job. That's what they're effectively helping to do in Orange and Chatham counties, is to provide that larger natural area landscape so that these wildlife species can continue to exist in North Carolina. Just a little bit more, wildlife, larger areas are more resilient to catastrophic events. So if over time, that excess of time, something comes along like a drought, a larger natural area is going to be able to rebound from that event, whereas a smaller natural area is not going to have like a founding population to necessarily rebuild those populations over time. So they're more resilient, larger. And again, just to hit on this again, we're trying to protect our natural areas in a way which reduces edge impact, and that includes all those impacts that come from having developed landscapes up against natural areas, like invasive exotic species, cats, increased predation, lighting impacts, especially at nighttime, litter, stormwater runoff. So we have buffer recommendations that are based on scientific literature of what kind of buffers you would need on streams to protect habitat for sensitive species. If you want to protect habitat for species that use that habitat alongside streams, try to go for a 600-foot buffer. Chapel Hill has a 150-foot buffer, which is actually quite amazing for a city to have that wide of a buffer. Cities in North Carolina that have that wide of a buffer. But obviously protect the floodplain, and then you'll be protecting habitat for things like port salamander, who will lay their eggs in the stream, but then, in the summer, they'll go up into the uplands and hunker down. Tricolored bat, of course, uses the streamside habitats as well, and they need a wider area. For stateless species, which you have in this area, our recommendation is 100-foot buffer, protect the stream for aquatic stateless species. So 150-foot buffer is doing a great job. And if those species become federally listed eventually, which they may, then we would recommend a 200-foot buffer to protect those aquatic species. Again, we have buffer recommendations for isolated wetlands, which are like where the four-toed salamander is up in North Chapel Hill area. In the rural buffer area, we have a 150-foot buffer recommendation, and then an upland buffer of 600 feet. And that's because, again, they go down to the stream, but they also use the uplands. And this is Durham was rezoning this property again, Creek bottomland along 15501. This is Big Fat Major Road going through there. It's 15501. I'm sure you've all driven right past this area. There's a big natural heritage natural area. They were rezoning it back when the days of the light rail were on the table. And as a way, we told them we thought they should have a 300-foot buffer on the natural heritage natural area, because science has shown that if you have a 300-foot buffer on forested areas, that will help reduce the impact on those protected forest areas if development were to be up against that. And they did they didn't want to call it buffer, because buffer has such regulatory implications. Instead, they called it a transitional use area. And they, I think it was a 200 foot, they did a compromise, 300 foot was a lot for them. So they put in a 200 foot buffer along that natural area when they rezoned this property. Now, that light rail is now no longer in place, but I still think they have that 200 foot transitional use area. And actually, when Chapel Hill was making the future land use map, I overlaid the data on that map and identified where there were habitat blocks and corridors that were zones for some developed land use, and shared that with the planner who was responsible for that work, and she was able to create transitional use areas for those areas as well. And so that's kind of buffer. So it will be less impacted, they'll be less impacted by development once those future land uses are built out. Okay, lastly, connectivity is an incredibly important part of conserving natural resources in developing communities. And again, just to focus on that connectivity data I showed earlier, you can see these important corridors and habitat blocks moving, crossing. Then we have recommendations about wetland connectivity. Wetlands often, isolated wetlands are often in complexes, wetland complexes. And so trying to reduce the fragmentation of wetland habitat is really important. Then lastly, we have recommendations on how to incorporate this information into incentives and ordinances. And Chapel Hill has some really good, I guess, ordinances. I don't know if it's ordinances, but policies and practices in place. And one of those things is that natural areas mapper that Judy mentioned and demonstrated. That's hopefully going to be an initial kind of filter so that developers understand, like at the very beginning of their development planning work, where high quality natural areas occur, and what are the expectations from this community on how to protect those areas. And hopefully it will drive development away from those areas and towards areas that are more suitable for development, areas that are shown in red. And so our resources have a lot of case studies and examples of how communities should incorporate conservation data and science into effective conservation incentives and ordinances, and how they can remove barriers to effective conservation. And in our handbook, we have a lot of links to that. I think that could be part of what we talk about today in our discussion. And so we have this rewrite coming up. And there are important habitats that occur within Chapel Hill. We want to make sure that the protections that are already in place stay in place with the rewrite. And also that if there's any opportunities to enhance protections for our natural resources in Chapel Hill, that those also get put into place through that LUMO update. And I have some ideas, like perhaps the zoning for the Resource Conservation District, I really hope stays in place, but maybe there's additional data that could also inform perhaps that zoning layer. I don't know, like the connectivity data I was demonstrating earlier. Yeah, with that, I mean, that's the end of my presentation. But I encourage anybody who's interested in learning more about Liver Grove resources, come to that workshop we said, and we'll have more workshops. So if you're interested in learning more, jot down my contact information and get in touch, and I'll be glad to talk to you more about it. Open up for a discussion. Thanks. Yeah.
So thoughts, comments, questions?
I have two things. One is thank you so much, because this is really a way to address my friends who have complained about. So, yeah. And two, have you heard, or anybody's heard about plans to build in the buffer?
The rural.
The rules.
Yeah, I had heard that that was changing somehow.
So I'll tell you what I know. The county I know is undergoing a comprehensive plan. We're in the midst of that today. As far as I know, there are no changes to, there may be little tweaks to the rural buffer. There are some, so we think of, and I'm not the one to tell you all, but I'll tell you what I know, and with a little squishy on the side, that it is rural buffer nothing ever happening there, but it is, that's not quite how it is. There's rural subdivision that happens, they have large acre lots. There are some different types of rural buffer zoning where they do allow some, things like, we had a recent project come forward next to the landfill. Events, they're putting, a tree farm is doing some work they're gonna be doing, where they're gonna bring their tree debris and mulch in the rural buffer. And that is an allowed use in a specific rural buffer type of zoning district, that's county zoning, so it's not under our jurisdiction. I don't believe there are any, there's not an interest in removing the rural buffer. Yeah, that, it is part of that joint planning agreement, so it would be, three jurisdictions would all have to agree to that.
And that is that there are large development in places. That is. That's allowed because you're allowed to have one.
I do think they try to do some of the conservation subdivisions that are shown on roads, for trying to put the houses here and leave areas free. They are on well septic, so you have to, there's data. But it is part of the, there is not a plan to remove that. I have not heard at all. And planning staff, and then not at all.
I was just gonna say, thank you, Brooke. I really find the toolbox to be a very useful tool, and I've used it a lot in reviewing ordinances and making recommendation on ordinance changes, based on the green dot. It's just, it's unfortunate that not. Been around years.
Yeah, 2010.
So it's been around for a while.
Really two staff. It's really one thing.
Right.
And they're both here in this room.
Yeah.
That brings up another question. I noticed on one of the slides there. Plethora. Conservation oriented organizations across the state.
Yeah.
What kind of communication and coordination?
There was a point when we were trying to do train the trainers and get other conservation organizations to drink the green rooms possibly and to help us with trainings and things, and it just never took off. Everybody has, they have a lot of work they gotta do with their normal jobs, so adding that to their plate was really something that was realistic, I guess. But I have to say, we do have these partnerships that are in place, like in Chatham, we have a Chatham Conservation Partnership, and here in this area, we have Triangle Connectivity Collaborative. And while those partners are not doing the Green Growth Toolbox work, they are coming to those meetings, talking about the need for land use planning work and putting the things in my ears so I can learn about what's going on in the community that they're all, working in. And in that way, there's community. The Sandhills Conservation Partnership is another partnership that's been really good at helping to spread the green growth message to us. But then it's just her and I that are ultimately the ones who have to do the work, which is fine. But yeah, there's definitely communication about that. They understand the need and they do reach out to us when they know about it. Yeah. Oh, but I have to say, the Nature Conservancy in the Sandhills region is a really good partner that has been working on the green growth toolbox with us at some point. One step over. Yeah.
But fortunately, we have citizenry that's behind this for the most part.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the negative side? About some of the wildlife that comes through those specifically here.
Oh, yeah, we have a whole department that's more than just two staff members to deal with human wildlife conflict issues. So, I mean, there are recommendations that we could share about like how to reduce conflict between wildlife and humans, but we often just refer that to those people because that's their department. But I mean, by providing safe passage through our communities for wildlife, the idea is that they will be roaming around in our undeveloped landscape, getting hit by cars. With that, hopefully they will be moving through to find really suitable habitat. There isn't a lot of there are wildlife species that thrive in these developed landscapes, like raccoons and deer, who do, do okay, but we want them to, I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a great answer to that. Elise, do you have any?
So wildlife conflict depends on the definition for that.
Yeah.
Some of these megafauna that can be nuisance species, it's usually not just one person that's not doing anything that's dealing with the issue. It's other people that are doing something that might be attracting wildlife.
Oh, right.
There's that issue too, but, ultimately, with larger spaces served, we can provide them more priority habitat that they would rather be in, rather than this edge habitat where they don't really have much choice to deal with it. I'm speaking on deer terms, for the most part, but this also includes some of our smaller mesopredators, might be a nuisance species as well, like. If a community is having a lot of wildlife conflict, we do, like she said, have people who do wildlife management division that can help make recommendations for, how to manage those species along the habitat, not as much of a, maybe rules that can be adopted by the city that might reduce the impact, like bear wise. You guys are getting more black bears, which I'm not sure if you are. They move through, yeah. There's a lot of that can be implemented that reduce that impact, that wildlife. And so,
Yeah,
and I'm sorry, if you're really.
with that.
We can definitely make lots of recommendations. There's people that make recommendations. Dealing with that in the all that time. Yes, sir.
So when we say development, do we mean things like greenways or trails also fall into that category?
Usually we think about our natural areas in two tiers. One tier is the same things that don't even. Those are like our natural areas. And we have recommendations, like if we want to put trails through those areas, how to do it in a way which is going to be least impactful. And then we have tier 2 resources. And if we were doing a training, we would get into that, but those are just areas that are, more suitable. For impact.
Which would include like,
Anyway,
In your proposal, all the green strings,
yeah,
and move it, is where our previous area.
right, yeah, so that,
So there's the tension, there's the potential tension.
yeah. Well, that. But.
And that's where it's complex,
Yeah.
It's not just.
I was wondering how Chapel Hill is gonna incorporate the toolbox to your memo.
It's part of our conversation. So,
Well, I think it's a good tool. I'm just curious, that was what.
So. I wanna.
Yeah.
How is our planner working on,
So the question of the group is how we're gonna incorporate this data into the program, right? It's tricky, right? A lot of, as Brooke mentioned, Chapel Hill is kind of already at the forefront when it comes to environmental protection in the state. We can't necessarily do things, or it might not be the most prudent to do something experimental. Rewrite is really first and foremost about getting our use management ordinance back to a good, solid foundation. We do very much want to create a environment and culture, continuous improvement. In areas where incorporating this data into the ordinance may require more experimentation, doing work that's a little bit. Rewrite might not be the best opportunity for that, but we'll come back. Continuous improvement, right? We don't want to be in a situation where we're only kind of revisiting our ordinance every 10, 15 years, right? And so we can do that experimentation. There are obviously though some very well tested opportunities for standard rewrite that don't require. There's a great image in Brooks' presentation of different ways that a subdivision can be oriented, right? Like a conservation subdivision. Now, in the current is an option, but it's not the, we don't direct people to that path by default. That's a simple tweak that could really, again, bring. Exactly. Or there could be such a massive incentive tied to that, right? That if you go the conservation neighborhood route, suddenly your minimum lot size is significantly smaller, might be required or allowed under the zoning district, right? So basically, if you're going to conserve your land, your ability to develop the remaining portion shoots up. So that's the sort of thing that doesn't get us into experimental territory, but we can definitely think about incorporating in the rewriting.
So my counter to you would be that most of the information that's based on not really would, I guess, be a difference in the ordinance. I'm not, you were saying it's experimental, but I'm saying not information.
The experimental element is translating it into land use regulation that's administrable, based on limitations on local governments. Is long-lasting, predictable, and it's education. That's where the experimentation. Yeah, I mean, that's the limitation, so. Paul mentioned is, it's a way of thinking about state or local land use. In the context of what the state allows us to do. In North Carolina, our authority is only that just given to us by a general use power, call it, to do what's in the best interests of people and environment. We can only do what the state allows. That is kind of that constant. Yeah.
And we're constantly taking this.
It used to be much more or less. It's been increasing.
I wanted to point out one part of our ordinance today that is no longer. We have tree standing. There's this project just a few years, the Azalea Estate. The senior apartment. It looks like they cleared all of them. And when it was being, we had a lot of concerns. There was anybody driving down this. But they actually, if you had their site plan, they preserved a huge portion of the property in the rear of that property. And that's a decision or a guidance that staff gave that developer. Move that building up, preserve the area in back, rather than our typical standard is you have a 30-foot buffer. You put your building and then you have a 30-foot buffer. Let's switch all that, put that all of it here. It's more dense, it's more intense to drive down the street. But actually, I think we ended up with more preservation on that property. So it is our ordinance trying to look at, the, you know, one way of replicating the green road. You know, tree canopy, have different standards that have. Conservation subdivision, and we conserve our land by moving the coasters, maybe having no buffer. I don't think we want habitat running up and down this, right? But in the back of that property, there is an easement that runs, and you walk, you get all through the schools and up the, you know, there's a creek back. So we're preserving that. So I mean, those are decisions that are focused on the green road. But it's hard to see that people were not happy. You drive up and down Essex when that first was built, and I spent a lot of time showing people on the site that they need to conserve a huge portion of their property. We need to be, you know, think of it, you know, at a larger scale, not just medium. Think, you know, just that one application to meet them and have the.
The building incentives into the ordinance that will promote that.
I mentioned another thing, Allison and I, a few years ago, during COVID, were working together to, so as part of the resource conservation district ordinance or policy or something, that the survey, the developer is required to do a site survey of the resource conservation district. And identify wildlife habitat, it's part of the language that exists. However, there's not a lot of guidance on what is wildlife habitat, and so we work together to create a guidance document to share with these consultants who come out and do these site surveys. So there's some, you know, like, these are the priorities. Like, if you find these priorities, we want to make sure we're not putting a stormwater pond down that part, because you can do that, right, in the resource conservation district. So we never went forward with that, you know, but we have those ideas in that perhaps those ideas that were developed through that process could be incorporated. But, you know, there are, I'm sure Allison has ideas, for those of you who know Allison. And so I can take her brain and be a person who, comes to one of your meetings, as a chair.
Patient different, where you do, people come from Chapel Hill and don't see three or town. And now we have change that most citizens don't see, don't understand, and because they have patient in front of them. Being stepping back, it's equal, it's even. Here's one who probably because that. Win it all.
There's, excuse me, statistics on, for example, greenway utilization. Bike utilization in general, pretty much there. How do people, you measure degree of populace? I think yeah, I mean, our surveys actually done, walk down the greenway, aspire one to become environmentally.
Bergen. You're on the spot. Bergen is our manager of the office of. And so she is, so I'm sorry, she. How do we measure what the breeding rate is?
No.
We can count and how. Understanding that.
Yeah, we've had some help, we have counters on some of our greenways, disrepair, we really don't, it's not, in terms of anticipating demand, there's not a for that. In terms of planning facilities, get some encounters.
you go on the Great Lake, you see counters out there, kind of like. Answer your question?
In part, also interested in measuring the utilizing these resources.
Well,
Any
the
way of detecting,
the counter. Trying to continue to project. And we're starting. To also. Information on, you know, how much more growth there will be based on what. And then. I mean, we don't figure out where to cut footprint. Like counting the number of people who swim the river. If people don't feel safe. Mom doesn't feel safe to sit down, Franklin Street, she's not gonna ride her bike. And so. Projection, the places where it has been done. And and our facilities here, we see them be used. I mean, look what's happening in Paris. Happening in New York City with 60 people are using them like crazy. And Paris is. So.
People will come.
And we all know that.
I can add to this, though, I know from being, you know, working with communities across the state, whenever they put out surveys where like they're gonna update their comprehensive plan, great comprehensive plan. Get kind of the, what are the priorities of the community, you know? And all trails and natural area protection are high priority for the majority of people.
The other thing that the town does is we certainly have a community survey every 2 weeks. And you can look at a lot of data. It's a physically valid survey of the community that gives us information about it. And one of those is our community. So we know from that, the community value, they think that they're working. So it's not data counts on a particular facility, but we know that that. And all those results. You look at job, they're all.
4 years ago, when I was in school, I had an instructor who said, there's gonna be a corridor between Birmingham, Alabama to Raleigh. And it's going to grow geometrically. You don't know. Yeah. And look at what's happened in that corridor. It took a little while. Problem with taking surveys is you know what you need now, not planning for the future. That's something the planning department. We need to be planning out there. Look at Chapel Hill, it's made up of triangle. You can't get anywhere. You can't go through the house. We didn't plan it what we ever thought to do what's do. Got it. They're trying to get ahead of it, not just.
Yeah, I think that the free community framework. In ways are two important. Thinking about how do we build connected. We can obviously talk about this.
Here are town connected workers, and how many people are?
We have a lot of town staff here in, your town. And I think we have such a great diversity of. Yeah, it's learning for us too. I mean, it's, you know, listening to is. We want to learn along with.
It's also helpful to hear people who work with the town.
To the evidence too that, as a person from the community here, one of the things that this map will help is people remember these national areas. Marcia did great work with your map of the open space. Like I spent a lot of time in the Gaddis Field Conservation Area. 8 acres in town bottom. People don't know where that is. People don't know what's going on there. So more people think this map down and use as a tool, I didn't say map. Being on the GIS would be tremendous. Because people didn't know these places exist. When people come out, they think of where these natural areas are, because people know where they are. If they do, they just or places not for them, or places for future development. But just getting a map out be a good tool. Also, just inform people where these places are. Do a lot. And they're incredibly wide.
I think we, and I'll say for all of us, that we greatly appreciate the conversation. And it is very helpful to hear your thinking, and understand. You said earlier about, understanding what food does. I mean, that's a message that we need to, we need to sound. I mean, that there's a lot of reasons why we happen the way we are. And I think in fact, it's not simple, it's very complex. And I think a lot of the policies work that we need to have a pretty refer to the rural buffer. I mean, that was a huge precedent. I don't think Chattanooga there, like, areas in those areas which just, they don't have a we have them, changes are dynamic. So I think that is very.
I'm just gonna throw out that if you. The Sierra Club has national infill. Sierra Club, Smart Growth, policy. There's a whole guidance, meant to be. Citizens understand why infill. And it explains how local people can be advocates for that kind of approach. And it's just, it's a.
Very easily understood.
What's the question? I mean, UNC is a huge part of Chattanooga. How does that fit into actual overall? There between.
We work with them on, we have a regular standing meeting. And I know that their chances are, they're not. There are.
But it's not the same as the joint plan.
No, we work, I mean, we have these monthly meetings with them, we work with them and, the town regulations. Things that happen on campus are based on the development plan that. We have a very, cursory review of that. And again, we want them to continue to redevelop on campus and not. Pieces of property that have off campus are reviewed often by our. So you have all of our contact information or some of our contact on that agenda. We're happy to, if you have questions, please send them in. We probably don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.